Well, I did that. I really did. And okay.
Have we just been talking to each
Well,
other without not?
here's what we're going to do, folks. Welcome to pjnet.tv. For reasons that I cannot explain, we have not been on the air until now. So, well, Dustin, I'm sorry, we're all out of time. We've got. We're going to go a little extra tonight. Folks, welcome to pjnet.tv. On the screen is our first time guest, and I'm going to help you pronounce his name, okay? It's Dustin. And the last,
And the last one.
Leimgruber. Lime. Think green fruit citrus, okay? Green, okay, and it's not, it's kind of, Dustin and I have an unusual last name as well. And at my age, you just accept it. You just, however you want to go with it, it works. So we got you on the air now. Sorry for that delay. I thought it was working. Well, gosh, y'all missed a lot of good stuff while we were talking to nobody. We were. Dustin is our first time guest, joining us from his home in the great state of Louisiana. And as you can tell, Louisiana. Listen to me.
A little bit further north.
A little bit north of Louisiana in Indiana. It's one of those Iana things, not Florida nor Georgia. It's Iana, Indiana. And behind him, if it were daylight, there's a beautiful cornfield. It really looks very Midwestern. You're living the dream. Dustin, but it's dark there, folks. Dustin, I'm going to take a chance and say he's kind of bivocational, but he really is he's a pastor full time, but unusual that pastors would also write fictional books, particularly children's fiction. But nonetheless, that's exactly what he's done. His book is depicted behind me, Sanctus Chronicles. Now that's a heck of a name. Where'd you get that?
Well, I use a lot of Latin in the book. The school that our kids go to is a classical school, and so they use that to build up their vocabulary and understand the English language. So if you know a little bit of Latin, or if you just know your English well, as you go through, you'll see some of the names of the characters give away who they really are, and that mirrors a biblical theme that you can tell who somebody is through their name.
Okay, well help me out. Since I never took Latin, sanctus, as in sanctuary, as in sanctified, as in set apart. How am I doing?
Yep, you got it. It's a family that is set apart, and you can see that they are different than all the rest of the kids at the school that they've been thrust into. At the very beginning of the book, you find out that they are outsiders, and at this school, everybody else seems a little bit different. The main character is really interested in learning, but everybody else just wants to make sure that they're getting passing grades.
All right, well then we'll move on to Chronicles. Chron means like chronology, as in time. How am I doing?
Yep, you got it. And this is the first book in a series, and I haven't written the rest of it yet, but I've got my outline in my head. And so you'll be going through these chronicles, which is another good biblical word, as you follow them through the history of what's going on, just as a small spoiler, not just in the school, but in the rest of the wider world.
So what's the Latin significance of Leimgruber? What is that, Polish or Czech?
That's a German. And
okay, yeah.
Dustin's a pagan name, or stone, so not all of our names signify exactly who we are.
Not bad. Well, you're a full-time pastor, and I want to say, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, and I'm not being, I'm not trying to marginalize or be harsh, but I'm a skeptic when it comes to Christian fiction. When someone says they're a Christian author and they're writing fiction, I wonder in other words, you wrote a fictional story, you're also a Christian, but that doesn't really make it a Christian fictional story. And I'm always looking for, in the stories, what is the scriptural taproot that taps into that authority of Scripture? And in some cases, my skepticism is warranted. Sometimes I had a real turnaround when I watched the movie, The Chronicles of Narnia. Purely fictional, but I can remember my zeal coming out of that movie. I had taken my daughter to it. She was probably 8 or 10 at the time. I don't remember. But I remember how enthused I was that somebody had used these scriptural themes and portrayed them in a way that the unbelieving world would be perfectly willing to ingest and digest. But it would give us a chance to communicate with them. And the purpose in storytelling, the purpose in fiction, the purpose in a parable. I think you put it well while we were off the air. Do you remember what you said? I'd rather you say it. It was pretty darn good.
Well, it's I'll probably get around to it, but when you mentioned seeing that movie in the theaters, I'm a big fan. I've read the majority of what Lewis wrote, and his idea for that book and some others that he did. He also did some sci-fi and some other genres. But he imagined if you were to take the character of God and put him in a different universe, whether that was a different fantasy universe or a different planet, how would he act there? And what would that world look like? And as he imagined that world, you could see more and more of the character of God coming out. And so as we're able to accurately do it from the God that we can see in the Bible and put it in this world, it does open up a door for people who aren't Christian to say, oh, I'd love to see that movie in the theaters.
Yeah.
Whereas they might not see something that's more explicitly Christian. They can start to get those themes in, and then you can have a conversation about it to say, well, you know, when Aslan died on the stone table, that was like the cross. And they've already been impacted by Aslan dying on the stone table, and now you move from the lesser to the greater.
And he willingly gave himself as a sacrifice. You know, the story is 2,000 years old, folks. I mean, it's just it's cast in a different way. But I would love you to repeat while we were off the air, but now that we're on the air, the power and usefulness of allegory as a way to express truth.
Yeah. Well, it's a story with a deeper meaning, and we're wired into stories. And so as you get sucked into that story, you are starting to understand the principle behind it, and then you can go and apply it. This is something that's used all throughout the Bible. And if you start off with saying, well, here's what's bad and you're doing it, then people will just, you know, get offended and push back sometimes. But if you can end a story with, you are that man, you may have been convicted before you got to that point.
Oh, you just reminded me of something. David and Jonathan.
Yep.
Do you remember? That just hit me. You are that man. Jonathan skillfully told a story to effectively ensnare and bring under conviction David. I never thought of that. I've always thought, you know, parables, you know, New Testament, but it goes back to the Old Testament. How then, or how good of a job? Give yourself a grade. This book, Sanctus Chronicles, aimed at what age group? Give yourself a grade on how well you think you're achieving that goal. Where are the truths that come out? Give yourself a self-critique.
Yeah. Well, as far as the parables go, that's my favorite part of the book. That's what my kids ask to read again and again. And that's, you know, I just got a review on Amazon today. Like somebody said they read the book twice through with their kid. And so I think it's pretty good literature. I know that I'm biased on that. But for instance, there's a poem in the middle of it. It's a 40 stanza poem. Before I wrote it, I just sat down and I prayed for a little bit, and some ideas washed over me on what the plot would be on this poem. And then I wrote for 2 hours, and out came a 40 stanza poem, which in my opinion is the best part of the book. And it shows all of these characters, you know, going back to Aesop's fables, you just use animals to substitute for people. And at one time, they're all worshiping this great king of the mountain who lives on top of the mountain, and he's truly glorious. But then you get somebody who comes in, and it's not a serpent, but it's a crafty raccoon. And he tries to tell all of the other animals that we don't really need to worship this king. We can have all the good things without the judgment. And so they start to walk around the outside of the mountain where they can see the glory of the kingdom. But they walk around for so long, they start to wear down through the mountain. And they go deeper and deeper and deeper until they're finally in the pits of the mountain, and they find another king. But that one's the Goblin King. And he only wants a man for them, would do whatever you want. And so they gladly take it, but then that very quickly turns into hell. And there's one animal that escapes from this pit and goes up, but it's been so long they've actually forgotten who the true king is. And they go up and they see this king, and they quake and quail at his feet. And he says, you know, bring some bird seed for this bird, bring some drink, bring a royal robe, and take care of this bird because I want to. And this bird is just so amazed because all it's ever known is darkness. But now it's being lifted up by a king, and later it's sent out to go back down to the pit and to go and to preach to those that are there that there is a greater king. And so having a poem like that children are able to memorize, having artwork that goes along with it, using that as allegory, just hits in all these different ways that God has created us to have a story stick in our head, the way that we can memorize it, the way that artwork stays with us.
Fascinating. Have you always been a writer, Dustin?
I've written things for quite a while. I started writing poetry back in grade school. I think that's just something that comes with being a communicator.
I I don't disagree with that, but the two are not necessarily positively correlated. For example, I'm a coach. I'm a communicator. I motivate. Speech. I've worked in radio, but I have never had one inkling of an urge to write anything. And as old as I am, that's probably not going to change too much. But funny enough, writing is something that is used by people that in my opinion are rather unlikely. For example, General Patton, who was a weird character, very capable general, but yet he was also a writer. There were several historical figures in military history and political history, world history, that you find out that they were writers, and yet their works never got published, but their accomplishments in their respective disciplines, whether that be policy, political, or military, did. So I wonder why their books didn't get published. First in a series of how many, Dustin?
I don't have an exact number yet. I have some under themes that go through Christian history, and I want to explore those. Mm-hmm. And it's Lewis's same idea of taking something that happened in the real world and then moving it into a world just slightly over. So I'll be exploring a lot of those themes, and when I run out of theme to explore, I'll close it up.
How fast do you think these will come out? I mean, what's the life cycle of these books? Your first one just out now. You're going to follow it up within 6 months or a year or two. You're young. You got time,
Yeah. Well, if it goes well, I'd like to write about one a year. This first one took 2 years, not because it took 2 years to write it, but because after I wrote it, I was still learning all of the things about publishing. I was starting to look around for agents and publishers. And when I eventually figured out that self-publishing was the best way to go, that took about a year to figure out. And so hopefully, after I've laid this groundwork, it'll be a little bit faster.
How far down that road did you go spinning your wheels to ultimately publish it yourself? How close did you get, or how frustrated did you get?
Well, I got quite frustrated at a lot of things, and I did have 2 companies that ended up merging, so really it's kind of 1.5 companies offer to publish the book. But when you do that, you lose a little bit of creative control. You have to go through their editors and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And by the time I figured out that this is something that I could get to press faster and do it the way that I'd like to do it, I just decided I've got to shoot this down. After trying for a year, I've got to say no, I'm sorry.
Yeah. How's your church? How's your congregation handling this?
There's not a whole lot of fantasy readers in the congregation. I've got one guy who is absolutely fantastic. He's at every single Bible study, and he's always praying for me. Even when we couldn't meet due to COVID, we would do Bible studies online. And he handed it back to me after about 50 pages, and he said, "I just don't like fantasy literature. I'm sorry."
Well, he's honest.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, there's other people in the congregation that are readers, and that's one of their genres. And so, yeah they've gone through it, and they've enjoyed it.
Any pushback, like, hey, you're supposed to be pastoring our church, how you're spending your time writing this book? Any pushback?
Yeah, there's always pushback on stuff like that. And, as a pastor, it's always a double bind that if you spend your time in the study getting ready for your sermon, people criticize you for not going out and talking to people in the community. And if you go talk to people in the community, they say, "Well, why aren't you talking to people in our church?" So the package is part of the territory.
Oh, I thought that was only Baptist. I feel so much better, you know. And
I think that's all of us.
yeah, and you know, we've gotten into this modality that, you know, we've professionalized, you know, everything. So we've hired our pastor, so it's his job to go to the hospital to visit people, you know, and I think, well, not really, or put it this way, he sure can go and maybe should go, but that doesn't excuse us from going. He's not going. It's like the Great Commission. Every once in a while, I get speaking engagements, Dustin. Not very often, but when I do, I talk about the Great Commission. And I said, look, folks, read this thing. Let's go. Let's just go word by word here. It says go. That's a volitional verb. It doesn't say send others. It says go, and it says ye. That means you. That means me. That means personally. Personally get involved. But yet so much of the emphasis in our church culture is to, well, you know, the Wisdom Factory at headquarters, they really know what the true needs are. So what we'll do is we'll send money to them, and they'll figure it out better than we could have figured it out on our own. And I know that different denominations use different practices and approaches and ideas, but I basically caution that type of thinking. Not that it's bad, but if that is a substitute for our own personal involvement, then I would say that falls short of the standard that has been set for us as not a suggestion, a command to go and make disciples.
Yeah,
So,
I could talk your ear off for the next hour on this exact theme. I talk about this regularly from the pulpit. This works its way into the book. You know, that idea that the Great Commission, or really any church work, is to be done by the clergy, is something that happened as the Roman Catholic Church was getting further and further away from the scriptures. And even after the Reformation, it still managed to hold on with Protestants. This idea that, well, we pay them to do the prophetic ministry,
right.
so we'll just go send them out to do it.
Yeah.
But the scriptures talk about the role of elders as being people that concentrate on the word and prayer. And so that should be the center of your work as an elder. And the work of the church, meaning all Christians, is the Great Commission.
Right. It's real simple, but we've professionalized it, and it makes us parishioners. You know, the people in the congregation. Well, we're not qualified, you know, because we don't have a PhD in divinity, or, you know, I thought divinity was some sort of thing you got down at the bakery. But anyway, that sweet.
Maybe you can get those in Florida. We don't have these in our bakeries.
Oh, okay. But it makes us feel that we fall short of the credentials that we need. Look, folks, a 7-year-old that is saved has the credentials to share their experience. Okay, that's all. And if we wait until we have the credentials, theologians have been debating some of these topics for literally millennia, and they have not agreed on a conclusion. There are some things that are just beyond our ability to understand this side of heaven. But, you know, it's not what we don't know that's the problem that's holding us back. You know, it's what we need to use what we do know. I'm starting to preach now, and I can't help it, Dustin. Hey, Dustin,
Go ahead.
You've already got some good reviews on Amazon. You didn't get a good your number one parishioner.
I still love him.
It just doesn't. Here, we're going to, you know, you don't know this, but we're in contact with him. He's going to be on the program next week, and he's going to tell us just how terrible.
He would love that.
But how on earth did you find your way to PJ Knit? Did we find you, or what happened? I don't know. Sometimes Barbara does a lot of this legwork. You know,
I'm sure there was a Facebook connection somewhere.
Probably.
You know, I'm in a lot of different groups with Christians and writers and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
that's probably how we stumbled into each other.
Yeah. Well, we wish you the very best. You know, I would say of luck, but it's really more than that, because the mission here is not to sell a bunch of books, or at least I hope it isn't. I hope the mission is to make an impact. What age groups would be most appealing? Would this book most appeal to?
Well, when I was writing this one, I was writing it for all my kids. And at the moment, my kids are as old as 11 and as young as 1. I've got 5 of them.
Mm.
And so I wanted to write it in the same way that the Chronicles of Narnia is written, that it's something that you can be, a kindergartner and hear it, and you can appreciate the story.
Mm-hmm.
But you can go all the way through adulthood and really get into the depth of the allegory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I describe this as a family read aloud book. It doesn't just fit neatly into one category. If you've got a third grader that's an excellent reader, get them the book. If you're going to read to your kindergartner, get them the book. If you just want to read on your own, it's probably not appropriate for preschoolers. But once you start to get into grade school and up, that's who it's meant for.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned Aesop's Fables. I don't know how old you are, but I don't know if that's still being taught. But I grew up on it, and I really appreciate the moral code. The character building aspects of those stories. But I'm very critical, and I'm so glad that people like yourself have come along. See, here's the problem with Aesop's Fables is not that the content isn't wholesome or it's not character building. The problem is it doesn't attribute that to the authority of God or the Scripture. Mm-hmm. So where then does our moral code, where does our good character come from? Well, God. And if we don't understand that, then it comes from somewhere else, and that is a fluid, shifty vapor, that has no anchor. We're not anchored in anything, because what is considered good and righteous in the past, some of the things that are we're almost to an age where evil is being called good and good is being called evil. Without that moral compass, without grounded in scriptural authority, it's not reliable.
I think that's exactly the reason that we're seeing so much trouble in the church today, is people were brought up on good morals, but they weren't shown who they came from. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have the ability to pass that on to the next generation. Mm-hmm. And so when you read Aesop's Fables with your children, you can say these are good, but not because Aesop decided they were good. These are good because the Scripture says that they're good. And you read all the pagan literature through the lens of the Bible, and you can see gold is gold. This might be the gold of the Egyptians that's being looted out of there as they're leaving. Mm-hmm. But you got to remember who gave you that gold and what it's for, because if you don't remember, then you're going to turn it into a golden calf and worship it 5 minutes after you're out of Egypt.
Well put, Pastor. That is so well put. We have misappropriated and malappropriated otherwise decent moral. So even the most pagan that are on the other side claim moral high ground.
Yeah,
they claim moral high ground. Mm-hmm. So they know that there is such a thing as morals, but they have simply misappropriated, or in some cases malappropriated those. But anyway, we're getting pretty theological. Dustin, good job. We're so glad you got to share with us, and we welcome you back anytime. And hey, when those other books come up, don't wait for me to find you. I mean, come find us again, and we'll do this again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, sorry I swear I hit the button that said go live, but apparently I didn't click with enough conviction. You gotta really hit that thing. It's a touchscreen, by the way. And well, folks, that's going to wrap it up. Not only for me tonight, it's going to wrap it up for me this week. But that does not in any way mean that we're wrapped up for the week. Far from it. Quite contraire. Tomorrow night, Steve Hazards takes the helm. Yes, he does. And I get a break. And I am so grateful for Steve that it allows us, it's actually strategic. If there's any work we need to do on the studio, which is often here lately, especially, or if we had the opportunity to travel, which we hope to be doing late summer-ish, maybe, hopefully, yes, pray for us. That would allow us to get on the road Friday. and get to our destination. So Steve handles the program on Friday night. He'll crank up at 9 p.m. as we do, but we just kind of let our hair down and enjoy some good tunes. He'll play some older retro stuff, some jazz. It's just really good. Just a nice time to relax and just enjoy. But then at 10 p.m. Eastern, he will uncork one of the more popular programs here at pjnet.tv, My Perspective and Comment, and he will look back at current events from the week that we've had, and he will talk about them from a perspective of, well, the scriptures, you know. Boy, and he'll have a lot to talk about this week, I'm pretty sure. And it's really become quite popular. So I hope that if you have a chance, you'll make your plans to be here at 9 o'clock if possible, but certainly by 10, and enjoy My Perspective. Get your coffee out and get your jammies on or something, because he'll go the better part of an hour, but he wraps it up with a higher look. And that's basically a really nice devotion, mini sermonette that he does, and he does such a wonderful job, and he means so much to all of us here at our PJNet family. He is one of many people that make all this possible, and I appreciate him as well as all of you. If you're in our chat room, you're part of it, you know, and I thank God, literally, you know, for each one of you. When I do my daily devotions, I just kind of picture a map, and I kind of go and say, yeah, you know, Lord, I mention you all in prayer. I don't know any specific needs, but I certainly mention you in prayer if I don't know a specific need, and place that before God. And I know that God is going to bless all of you for what you're doing here. I'm going to sign it off. You know how I do that. I ask 2 questions that together these form a challenge. So here we go. Question number 1. What is the single boldest, most courageous thing you have ever done for the kingdom of Christ? And question number 2. How long ago was that? As you contemplate those 2 questions, the challenge is to not be now or ever satisfied with either answer.